Sahanavavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. (16 to 25), please. Kim karma kimakarmeti kavayopyatra mohitaha tatte karma pravakshyami yajñatva mokshase shubhat karmano hyapi bodhavyam cha vikarmanah akarmanascha bodhavyam gahana karmano gatihi karmanya karmayah pashyet akarmani cha karmayah sabuddhiman manushyeshu sayuktah kritsna karma krit yasya sarve samarambhaha kama sankalpa varjitaha jnanagnidagdha karmanam tamahuh panditam budhaha tyaktva karma phala sangam nityatripto nirashrayah karmanyabhih pravrittopi naiva kinchit karoti saha nirashiryata chittatma tyakta sarva parigrahah shariram kevalam karma kurvannapnoti kilbisham yadrichhalabhasantushtaha dvandvatito vimatsarah samasiddhavasiddhau cha kritvapi na nibadhyate gatasangasya muktasya jnanavasthita chetasah yajñāyācharatah karma samagram praviliyate brahmarpanam brahmahavihi brahmagnau brahmanahutam brahmaiva tena gantavyam brahma karma samadhina Daivameva pare yajñam yoginah paryupasate brahmagnava pare yajñam yajñenaivopajuhvati. Question here, Mr. Srivatsan. Are you here? I should know about my true nature. Who is this I which should know? Now there's a story. In a state there was a great flood and everything was destroyed, almost everything. The king and queen died. The baby prince was saved because the nurse put the baby into a basket, but the basket with the baby floated away. Nobody knew where. And for many years in that state, the search was on for this baby prince that the kingdom lost, because they knew he was alive somewhere. In that same state, there was a beggar who would go about in the marketplace begging for alms, for food, for money. Every day that was his routine. So when he went to one place, a person said, okay, here is the money, move. He would take that. The next place he went, a fellow said, don't disturb us, we are busy now, go away. So he would move. And so on and so forth. By the end of the day, he would collect something. And that is how he was living his life. Totally dependent on what he collected for the day. That was his life as a beggar. So one day, when he was going around in this manner, the police came and caught hold of him and took him away to the palace. He was mortally afraid. He didn't know what they were trying to do to him. But it so happened that his age, his description, all fit in to that lost prince. So they believed this might be the boy. So when they went to the palace, they discovered that he had that birthmark on his right shoulder, and his features matched the features of the king and queen. So they conferred, the ministers and all the officials conferred, and they all agreed that this was the prince that was lost. Now the boy did not know what that meant. So they told him, we are so grateful that you're here, you are our king now, and they reinstated him as king. So he said, what does that mean? You give the orders and we follow. He had no idea what that meant because his whole life was begging. And he was so dependent on what he got for the day, and that's how he lived. Now, it took him some time to understand what it meant to be the king. And surely his stature was that of a king. He understood, and within a year, he lived up to his true identity as the king. After a year, he suddenly remembered what he was. And he had kept his beggar clothes as for keeps, just for memory. And he told his driver, he says, take me back to the marketplace. And without telling anybody, he went back to the marketplace after a year and wore his beggar clothes and went back to the same routine. What did he do? He went to the first shop. They gave him something. Second shop, he said, go away. Fellow has come back. He has no other work. We thought we got rid of him. And he's come right back. Go, 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 go. Some fellows were kind to him. Some fellows were not. And this went on for the day. And he collected whatever he collected for the day. He smiled to himself at the end of the day. So he just wanted to go through that same experience. Now, do you realize that there is a big difference between what he experienced doing the same activities 1 year back and now, after a year, he's going through the same actions, but there's a big difference in the way he reacted, the way he responded to whatever people did to him. So my question is, who was begging 1 year ago? Who was the person who was begging? Who was the person? I gave you the story, right? You listen to the story nicely. I'm asking you questions, you're not replying. Same means what? What do you mean? Some are saying beggar, some are saying prince. Okay, so in fact, it was the prince begging. Same person. Then what was the difference? And he was affected. The beggar, the prince, when 1 year back, when he collected whatever he collected, he was affected. He was happy when people gave, he was unhappy when people did not give, and he went through the day totally dependent on that little bit that he collected, because that's all he had. 1 year later, he goes through the same experience, but the impact is totally different. So who is begging now? The prince. What is the difference between the two experiences? What happened at the first instance? Why was he dependent? Because he did not know his true identity. You understand that? See, simply because of ignorance, he did not know his true worth. He was extremely affected. The moment he realized who he was, and going through the same experience, he smiled away. One fellow rejected him. One fellow accepted him. One fellow threw something at his face. As a king, he received everything with a smile because he realized his true identity. You get the picture? This is what they're saying. You do not know your true identity. Therefore, you are getting affected by everything in this world. Right and wrong, good and bad. How much we suffer. We enjoy a little bit, then go right down. Again, if somebody does something good to us, we enjoy. And then again we get depressed. So you are buffeted, thrown about, up and down, because of complete dependence on this world. And why are you dependent? Because you do not know your true identity. Srivatsa, do you understand? This I is the same self, the Atman, now begging at the doors of physical, material gains, physical pleasures, emotional joys, intellectually honor and dishonor, acceptance of your ideas. We are totally dependent today because we do not know our true worth. So what this knowledge does is, what must you know? You must know your true identity. And this is what all masters are telling us. All scriptures are telling us. Get back to your original nature. And then you see, you go through all the experiences that you're going through, you remain unaffected. That is the dignity of a human being. If we don't do this, the scriptures say, hanta, hanta, alas, alas. He says, iha ched avedidata satyamasti. Na ched iha vedin mahati vinashtihi. See, if you understand this and live your life, satyamasti, you are leading a life of satyam, truth. If you don't understand this and live your life, he says, mahati vinashtihi. Cannot be translated. Why? Nashti means loss. Vinashti means supreme-most of supreme losses. It's a superlative. Vinashti. Mahati vinashti. There is no translation. It's the most unkindest cut of all. It's like that. It's wrong English. You can't put two superlatives together. Most and unkindest. But it is, you give poetic license to a person who's conveying it so that you can understand the impact of what he's saying. He says, if you don't know this truth and live your life, it is the supreme-most of supreme losses. And what is happening with us? We are enjoying the bliss of ignorance. We don't know. Like the gentleman who came and stayed in the academy for 6 weeks, an American. And according to him, it was a life-changing experience. That's what he said. And he spent a good number of good number of days with us, and he went back and wrote this letter to Swamiji, giving all the glories of the academy and how it has changed his life. That's not so important. But at the end of the letter, he says, I must confess one thing, Swamiji. I was a very happy man until I met you. I was a very happy man until I met you. Because suddenly he realized, what am I doing? What's going on? I don't have an idea who I am. And I've already spent so many years of my life. And if anybody here is comfortable, there's only one reason: bliss of ignorance. We don't know what we have lost. So this is a wake-up call. Whoever gets it, gets it. Ya pashyati sa pashyati. If you see it, you see it. If you don't see it, you can go through life over and over again. Punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janani jatare shayanam. How many times have you gone through the cycle of birth and death, and you sit here? And how many more janmas are we going to go through this in ignorance of our true nature? So, some of us at least must wake up and understand, let me find out who I am. And until you do so, you will never find true happiness, true peace, or bliss. So, in the 14th verse we concluded, he says, actions do not taint the self, the God principle, nor does the self have any desire for fruit of action. He who understands this, he will not be bound by actions, though acting, like the king who came back as a beggar after a year. Though he is acting, none of his actions bind him, because he has discovered his true identity. Continue.
Evam nyatva kritam karma purvairapi mumukshubhihi kuru karmaiva tasmatvam purvaih purvataram kritam. Evam nyatva kritam karma purvairapi mumukshubhihi kuru karmaiva tasmatvam purvaih purvataram kritam.
Having known thus, action was performed even by the ancient seekers of liberation. Tasmat, therefore, you also perform actions as the ancients did in olden times. So, if you're carefully following, you will see that there is a shift in the approach. The last verse was a very subtle verse where he's drawing the relationship between the self in you, the God principle in you, and action. So he says, when you do not have any desire for the fruit of action, and you perform what you ought to do, this is the way one ought to act selflessly. If you are able to act in that manner, you will find your way towards liberation. Number one, you will be successful because you're objective. Like an actor on stage, he performs his role so perfectly, yet he knows he is somebody else. He doesn't believe he is the character on stage. He plays his role so well that you would believe, suppose he's a king, you would believe he must be a king, so royal, so graceful, his gait. You would identify with the personality, but he knows who he really is so perfectly. So, those actions do not taint his identity, nor does he have a desire for the fruit of whatever he's done on stage. He just knows he has a role to play, he plays it to the best of his ability and walks out, unaffected by whatever has happened on stage, right or wrong, good or bad, whatever he faced. It's just something he understands that he has to go through. That is his level of objectivity. Why? because he knows his true identity. Therefore, he successfully plays his roles, does what he ought to do. That's what Shakespeare says. All the world's a stage, and all men and women are mere players. They have their exits and their entrances. He gives more importance to you need to go. We've got a temporary sojourn here from birth to death. Any moment you go. So you must understand the value of the time that you have here and not merely get enamored by what the world is offering you. You've got to X-ray through all that you're experiencing and realize the true value of life. That's what you need to do. So that's what he says in the 14th verse, which is an appeal to the head, your understanding. And now he shifts in the 15th verse. He says, having known thus, whatever is explained in the 14th verse, action was performed even by ancient seekers for liberation. People in the past, sages in the past, they performed actions in this manner for liberation. That's the only way to find your own identity, to get moksha, to gain enlightenment, which is the purpose of human life. You're not an animal, you're not a plant, you're a human. So what makes you so special? What sets you apart from the rest of creation? This one ability to find your true identity. No other creature can do it except a human. And that is why he says, what a waste if you lose this lifetime in just living in this world, getting involved in this world, and not seeking the truth. That, he says, is mahati vinashti. There is no greater loss than that. We don't realize because we don't know what we are missing. Tasmat, therefore, why is it important? Tasmat. It must occur to us that this is a scripture, Bhagavad Gita, and yet you will find its approach is very scientific. Tasmat means therefore, like in a mathematical problem, you conclude, the answer is this. Therefore, tasmat, in a very scientific way he concludes, having given us the reason. But in this verse, he's appealing to the heart, because he says the ancient seekers did it, so should you. There is no reason here, but it's a respect for tradition. That is another way that knowledge is conveyed. So one is an appeal to the head, another is the appeal to the heart, so that your whole personality cooperates to do what you ought to do. Tasmat, you also perform action as ancients did in olden times.
Kim karma kimakarmeti kavayopyatra mohitaha tatte karma pravakshyami yajñatva mokshase shubhat. Kim karma kimakarmeti kavayopyatra mohitaha tatte karma pravakshyami yajñatva mokshase shubhat.
Even the wise are deluded here as to what is action and what is inaction. Therefore, I shall teach you action, knowing which you will be liberated from evil. Now, first of all, when you hear this word evil, all that it means is anything that is opposed to the truth, the reality, the self in you, the God principle in you. So what is opposed, what is taking you away from your original state is nothing but your own desires, your own vasanas. Vasanas are nothing but unmanifest desires. And each one is born into this world with vasanas. You're born because of vasanas. Now you have a choice. You can exhaust these vasanas that you are born with and get back to your original state. Or you could get into this world fulfilling your desires, and as you go on, you fulfill a set of desires, but you accumulate fresh desires, so your account of vasanas is never exhausted. And this is why we go through this cycle of birth and death, because there is never a time when you're free from desires or vasanas. In fact, if we could put it as an equation, human minus desire equals God. Humans minus desire equals God. God plus desire equals human. There you have it. Human minus desires equals God. If you take away desires, what remains is your original stature. That is why in different religions, desire has been personified as the devil standing between human and God. Christianity, Satan. Islam, Shaitan. Buddhism, Mara. Hinduism, Asura. Zoroastrianism, Ariman. And you can go on. This is something you can pick out of the internet. Nothing great. Just a little research and you can find out. These days, knowledge is so available to us. We just have to help ourselves. But what is interesting is, different religions have personified desire as the devil, the evil that keeps us away from our original nature. So what are we doing from morning till night? Satisfying desires. That's all we're doing. So you're catering to the evil in you. Now you may say, then should I stop catering to my desires? We're not saying you should stop. You should understand what are desires and make sure they are not guiding you in your actions. See, you got to command the desires. Desire should not command you. In other words, you act in this world not because you have a desire to do it, but because it is the right thing for you to do, whether you like it or not. So every desire has to be scrutinized. Then you will not fall into these worries and anxiety, stress and strain, joy and sorrow, and the whole lot of problems that everybody faces. So when you see this word evil again, anywhere, you must remember what he's talking about is vasanas, desires. That which creates agitations in us. So if anybody is agitated, you're experiencing agitations, it is because some desire is unfulfilled. There is no other reason for you to be agitated. The only reason why anyone gets agitated is because a desire is unfulfilled. So if you are a victim, if you are subservient to your own desire, you will be agitated. So he says, even the wise meaning those who are striving on the spiritual path, are deluded, not clear here as to what is action, what is inaction. Two important words, karma, akarma. Therefore, I shall teach you, when he says, you got to learn it. It's not somebody is going to come and teach you. I shall teach you. You have to understand, you have to learn this. What? You must understand what is action, because this is known to us, action. Knowing which you will be liberated from evil, meaning agitations created by unfulfilled desires. You will not be a victim of your own desires. So what is it? Why does he say learn about action? Understand action. In the next verse he tells us it's not that easy. Gahana. It's very deep. This action to be understood is not easy. But it is something that you can know if you apply yourself. What really is action? Now, action here, you could understand it in two ways, karma and akarma. All devolutionary actions, actions that are desire-ridden, we've just said, anything that you do because of desires will lead you to further desires. And you will never be free. It's like fire. You add logs and logs of wood into fire, it will consume them and it is ready for more. No sample of fire is ever going to say, "You've given me enough, thank you." That's not the nature of fire. You can add a whole building, it will consume a whole building, ready for more. This is the nature of fire. That is the nature of your own mind. You can feed it and feed it. Feed, look after the mind, cater to the mind, pamper the mind, feed the desires. It will never be satisfied. It will be satisfied, but it's ready for more. Next moment, you will have a whole set of desires coming up. That is the nature of devolutionary activities, desire-ridden activities. Sometimes we believe, I am only desiring good. I want to do good for everybody. What is wrong with that? We understand selfish, self-centered desires are bad. But what about good desires? We want to do good. Now, if you merely feed good desires, in the ultimate sense, you will only develop good vasanas. You will lead a good life, but you will remain confined, conditioned in this world. You will not know the truth. So he puts all karma, whether good desires or bad desires, driven by good or bad desires, as devolutionary because they are taking you away from akarma, which is your original nature. So karma, whether punya or papa, meaning actions performed with good desires will get you punya, actions performed with selfish desires will get you papa, but both will keep you away from your original self, akarma. Evolutionary activities, which are desireless activities, they do not produce further desires, further vasanas, therefore there are no agitations, plus the existing desires that you have will slowly be eliminated. That is evolutionary actions, akarma. This is one way of looking at these two words, karma and akarma. It is a relative sense. You can understand this. It's not difficult. Devolutionary, evolutionary. From the absolute standpoint, all activities, whether evolutionary or devolutionary, fall under karma, that is all actions, and akarma is the inactive principle, that which enables you to act. See, I've already cautioned you. Next verse he says, the nature of action is very deep. So you're not going to understand it overnight. But first of all, there is a division that he makes, karma and akarma. In a relative sense, we take devolutionary activities, even good desires. We're not only talking about selfish desires. Selfish desires or unselfish desires will take you away from the self. Therefore, he puts all those into one category, relative sense. But if you act in this world with an idea of getting rid of desires, those are evolutionary activities, akarma, from a relative standpoint. From the absolute standpoint, all activities, karma, and the inactive principle, that which enables you to act, is akarma. I shall teach you that action, knowing which you will be liberated from agitations, from evil. Next verse.
कर्मणो ह्यपि बोद्धव्यं बोद्धव्यं च विकर्मणः अकर्मणश्च बोद्धव्यं गहना कर्मणो गतिः कर्मणो ह्यपि बोद्धव्यं बोद्धव्यं च विकर्मणः अकर्मणश्च बोद्धव्यं gahana karmano gatihi.
Verily, action should be known, and forbidden action also should be known, and inaction should be known. The nature of action is impenetrable. So he repeats 3 times. Should be known, should be known, should be known. Without this knowledge, there is no chance of you or any human being to ever find the truth. You've got to get this knowledge. That's what he's saying. You must know. Now, why does he say action? Because it's like this. Imagine you are colorblind. You cannot see yellow. And in a basket, there are marbles kept of 2 colors, yellow and red. Now you can't see yellow, but you can see red. So if you take away red marbles, which you can see, what remains is the yellow marbles, which you don't know, which you can't see. Similarly, we do not understand what is this inactive principle, what is a karma, we don't understand. But he says, if you get the knowledge of karma, which you can easily do with a little effort, and segregate it, what remains is your original stature, akarma. So that is why he says, you must know, you must know, you must know. 3 times he repeats. In a scripture they don't repeat. But because of the importance of knowledge, you must know the difference. What is karma, what is action, what is forbidden action, what is inaction. So here he says, this karma that he's talking about, there are 3 types of actions. Karma consists of nitya karma and naimittika karma. Nitya karma means your routine, regular activities. Whatever you have to do from morning till night, you know what you ought to do throughout your life. These are activities you must perform on a daily basis as a routine. You should never forget that. And there are also naimittika karma, which is occasional duties. You come to a class like this, you have a vehicle when you go back. It's an occasional duty. You find an old person struggling on the road, you can offer a lift. It doesn't hurt you. You may not do it every day, but whenever there's a chance, you don't lose that opportunity to serve. It's an occasional duty. It's a duty. You can't ignore, what is my connection with that person? I have nothing to do with the person, and walk away. You could do that. But there are these occasional duties which a human is expected to do. Naimittika karma. And kamya karma, desire-ridden activity, is not prohibited. It's not prohibited, but it may not be your duty. For example, I like to eat mangoes. Kamya karma. You feel like eating mangoes. It's not prohibited, but it is not your duty to eat mangoes. It's something you like to do. So these are the 3 types of karma. Then he says, you must know what is forbidden action. Vikarma, nishiddha karma. Prohibited by whom? By your own conscience. You know very well, I should not eat sweet. First of all, you should not eat. That itself is a crime. But nobody can stop you. Every morning, noon, night, in between tiffin also, you push it. And then you suffer. You know very well you ought not to do it. Okay. Do you not have regrets? Has anybody in this classroom not had regrets? We all feel sometime, somewhere, I should not have done that. I should not have done that. That is regret. Now what is interesting in regret is, regret means you don't approve of what you did. If I come and say, or somebody comes and says, you should not have done it. Why did you do this? You will say, that is your problem. I think I should do, I did it. It is not somebody else coming and telling you. Regret is you don't approve of what you did. Then the natural question would be, if you did not approve of what you did, why did you do it in the first place? You did not follow your own conscience. You did not follow your own intellect. This is prohibitory sin. At least that much we should do. Why eat that extra? Why avoid exercise? Why neglect? Why regret? That much we can do, but we will not do it. So you must understand. That's why I say you must know what all you have not approved and done. Because there are a whole lot of activities in that category which can well be avoided. So, vikarma, and then he says, akarma refers to the self in you, the actionlessness, meaning actions performed by a self-realized person. Person who has reached the highest acts, but not in the way that we act, desire-ridden activity. So that's selflessness. See, first karma and vikarma are performed by ordinary people because that's the maximum we can understand. But our karma is the actionlessness. It's a karma. So though acting, he is really not acting. Meaning not in the way ordinary people act and produce more desires. So these are the three types of actions that you must understand. And then he puts in the last word. Just because you have understood it superficially, don't think that you have already understood it. Because if you have understood, you will act according to this verse, which is not possible. So it may take a whole life before you master the art of right action. The nature of action is impenetrable.
Karmanya karma yah pashyet akarmani cha karma yah sabuddhiman manushyeshu sayuktah kritsna karma krit karmanya karma yah pashyet akarmani cha karma yah sabuddhiman manushyeshu sayuktah kritsna karma krit.
He who sees inaction in action and action in inaction. Full toss. You don't understand what he's saying. Anyway, that is a scripture. He who sees inaction in action and action in inaction. You've got to read it slow, break it up. He is wise among men. He is a yogi, a doer of all actions. Actually, it's quite simple. If we go point by point, first of all, he says, Buddhiman, sa Buddhiman. Why? In a relative sense. If you follow the verses carefully, each verse, almost every verse, you can read it with two tongues, or you can interpret it in two ways. One is from a relative standpoint, from a limited standpoint, from a practical life. The other is from the absolute standpoint. There are two different ways of interpreting the verses. So the relative standpoint is what we can identify with, because you can put it to practice straight away. Absolute standpoint is the goal, is the ideal one must reach. So if you remember the two, you know which way you need to travel. And that is why the two are always given. So you get started and move in the right direction and don't stop till you reach your destination, the ideal state. So Buddhiman means a sensible person, a wise person, a person who's on the right track. He is objective. he functions like a witness, which is the opposite of getting involved. So when can you be peaceful and successful at the same time? When you are objective in life. Such a person is buddhiman. And absolute sense, if you function in this objective way throughout your life, not getting involved, not getting affected, you refuse to get affected. Yes, things could be annoying, but do not identify it. Move away from it mentally. We move away physically, but mentally we associate. Earlier in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, such a person who's restraining his organs of action, stays away from things, but mentally indulges. He uses a very strong term. He says he's a hypocrite. Mithyachara sauchate. Or a hypocrite. You be in the thick of things. There's no harm because you have to. You can't get away from anything. Whatever your duties and obligations are, you ought to perform. But mentally, you don't associate. Don't get affected. And that will happen only when you have higher values of life. Otherwise, it's impossible. So what are we trying to do in this classroom? We are trying to pick up some higher values. That's all. So if you learn a few values in life, you will not be enamored by what the world is offering you. That you will not understand until you pick up higher values. John Wooden was a basketball coach, an American basketball coach. He says, ability can take you to the top. With all your intelligence and capacity and ability and smartness, you will reach the top, no doubt. But it is character. It takes character to keep you there. So what are we trying to do here is to build that character. And character is built with values. There's no other way. So a little bit of values if you pick up, you are able to withdraw a little bit from the fascinations of the world. The world is very fascinating for those who do not know anything beyond the world. And for those who have reached that absolute state, he says, sayuktaha, who have reached the absolute state of perfection, yoked to the self, become the self. You can offer anything in this world. They say, keep the change. They're not interested. Because they have experienced something far, far superior. You have no idea. In one of the prakriyas, Atma Bodha by the great Adi Shankaracharya, I'll put it for you, verses 54. Do we have that? Just to give you a taste, what a prakriya teaches us. Introductory text, Atma Bodha. The Sanskrit version, please. So he says, can you read that out?
Yallabhana paro labho yat sukhana param sukham yajnana na param jnanam tad brahmetyavadharayet.
Once more.
Yallabhana paro labho yat sukhana param sukham yajnana na param jnanam tad brahmetyavadharayet.
What he's saying is, realize that Brahman, that Brahmetyavadharayet, realize that Brahman, the truth. Beyond its attainment, there is no greater attainment. Beyond its bliss, there is no greater bliss. Beyond its knowledge, there is no greater knowledge. There is nothing more. So when you get to that state, sa yuktaha, you can give any attainment in this world. It won't make a difference to you. The highest attainment in this world means nothing. the bliss that you get in that state and whatever you get in this world has no meaning. Because once you reach that, it's the highest. There's nothing beyond it. And there is no greater understanding knowledge beyond the knowledge of the self. That is why Vedanta, the word Vedanta means the highest knowledge. Veda Anta. It seems a paradox because we believe the more we learn, the more we need to learn. There is no end to gaining knowledge. But when you hit the consciousness, when you get to your highest point of perfection, whatever that is, at least we know there is such a thing. When you get there, there is nothing that you need to know beyond. That is sa-yuktaha. So he says, when do you get there? When you see inaction in action. So when you see activity, the whole world bristling with activity, you're able to x-ray through this whole manifestation and understand there is an inactive principle that is enabling everything to act. You're able to perceive that. And then in the self, in the God principle, you see the potential of activity. So action you see in the inactive principle, and wherever there is action, you're able to x-ray through and see there is something beyond, which is the inactive principle. When you reach that state, relatively speaking, buddhiman, you'll be objective, means you will be successful and peaceful. And in the absolute sense, you have merged with the self. You've become the self. Sa-yogi, sa-buddhiman, sa-yogi. Yogi means one who has reached the self. A doer of all actions. So nobody is getting away from obligations, but you do what you ought to do to perfection. That is the life of an ideal human being.
Yasya sarve samarambhaha kama sankalpa varjitaha jnanagni-dagdha karmanam tamahuh panditam buddhaha. Yasya sarve samarambhaha kama sankalpa varjitaha jnanagni-dagdha karmanam tamahuh panditam buddhaha.
So now from the 19th to the 24th verse, he tells us how actions of the enlightened are not binding. Now we did see in the previous verse, even a yogi is one who does what he ought to do. He's a doer of all actions. So that goes on, but the attitude is different from an ordinary person. An ordinary person would get involved and lost in actions and create further vasanas and desires, as a result of which you go through the cycle of birth and death endlessly. That is one way you can live your life. Or you cry halt and say, okay, I've come here, I've got this set of vasanas, and I must understand what is the purpose of human life. So you turn your direction towards the self, and that happens when you eradicate your vasanas by performing right actions. Whatever that right action is, we are coming to. So when you do that, you make your way back towards the self. Now he explains how the actions of the enlightened are not binding. So he says, he whose undertakings are free from desire and expectation. Desire comes from the past, expectation is for the fruit in the future. He whose undertakings, his actions go on, but he is not bound by either desire of the past or anxiety for the fruit. Whose actions are burnt by the fire of knowledge, because he has the knowledge of the higher, he refuses to be guided by his desires. Then what makes him act? Whatever he ought to do, he does. Not because of desires. not because he likes to do it. He doesn't do because he likes to. He does not avoid because he doesn't like. He does what he ought to do. So his actions, meaning desire for action, meaning vasana for action, is burnt. How? By the fire of knowledge. Him the wise call a sage. So such a person is an enlightened person. This is his relationship to action in this verse. And he continues the next.
Tyaktva karma phala sangam nityatripto nirashrayah karmanyabhipravrittopi naiva kinchit karoti saha. Tyaktva karma phala sangam nityatripto nirashrayah karmanyabhipravrittopi naiva kinchit karoti saha.
So here he gives us the symptoms of self-development. How do you know you're on the right track? He is in harmony with the external conditions. Previous verse he says he's free from actions, burnt by the fire of knowledge. That is one sign. Now he says he is in harmony with the external conditions. What is that? Having renounced attachment to fruit of action, ever content with what he gets out of his actions, depending on nothing. He's not dependent on what he gets out of that action. He does not do anything though he's engaged in action. So, though he is functioning, though he's acting, he says he does nothing. In the sense that we understand, we get involved, we get affected. He does not get involved, he does not get affected. So, though performing actions, he is not acting with desires the way we understand, the ordinary people understand. It fascinates. Remember yesterday we ended saying, look at nature. Because we don't understand. How can we not have motives? How can we not have expectations? Then why would we act? If you don't have a desire to act, why would you act? And yet, all of nature functions selflessly. Entire nature. The only difference is, nature is made in a way, it's inbuilt in nature to act selflessly. In the case of humans, you're given a choice. You could perform any type of action. You could act with selfish, self-centered interest. You could act with unselfish desires, or you could act selflessly. So unless you have the knowledge of the tree, how would you choose? Therefore, knowledge plays a vital role even in the choice that you make. So he says, here is a person who has renounced attachment for the fruit. How can that be possible? Unless you have higher values, unless you are attached to something higher, you cannot be detached from the lower. And what is that something higher? Knowledge of higher values, relatively speaking. The highest being the self itself. And then he says, ever content, nitya truptaha. He's always content, means he has that inner bliss, depending on nothing. He does not do anything, though engaged in action. So he's in complete harmony with the external world.
Nirashiryata chittatma tyakta sarva parigraha shariram kevalam karma kurvannapnoti kilbisham. Nirashiryata chittatma tyakta sarva parigraha shariram kevalam karma kurvannapnoti kilbisham.
Hoping for naught, with mind and body controlled, having relinquished all possessions, doing mere bodily action, he incurs no sin. Earlier he used the word evil. Now he uses the word sin. Now sin is not in the action. Another word that is commonly used in a scripture, it means, sin only means mental agitations. See, when you perform an action and it comes back and insults you, it comes back and agitates you, then you have committed sin. Otherwise, we can't put a list of actions saying, these are sinful actions, these are virtuous actions. List is set by whom? What may be right for you may be wrong for me. So who's the yardstick? Who do we follow? Follow your own conscience. You know best what is right. You know best what is wrong. And everyone has a conscience. Nobody is not given that conscience. You have it. But the problem with us is, or people, is the desires are so powerful. When the desires are very strong and you have too many desires, the conscience is submerged. That's about all. So why are we recommending, why is the scripture recommending to get rid of desires? So that your own conscience will guide you throughout your life. That's again something that Shakespeare tells us. He says, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. How can you be honest? What is the way to be honest? How to lead a truthful life? You don't have to go anywhere. Just listen to your own conscience. That call will be clear. Your conscience, the voice of your conscience will be clear. And there is no inner voice, please. Don't go back home and sit by yourself. And the wife asks, what happened? I'm listening to my inner voice. We will get calls. What have you done to him? He went very normal, he's come back abnormal. So don't hear, you won't be listening to some voice. It is just a way of saying there is something in you that tells you clearly right from wrong, good from bad. That is what you've got to follow. So here he says, hoping, nirashi. He is hoping for not, meaning there is nothing in the future that he wants to make him happy. He lives in the present, happy with what he's got. He's self-sufficient. And he says, mind and body controlled by what? Your own intellect. The intellect is able to control the activities of the body and mind. So the body is not running after sensual pleasures in a mad way. And the mind is not craving, mind and intellect, the inner personality is not craving for emotions or recognition. There is no demand. Why? Because the intellect is set on higher values of life, not what the world is offering. Relinquished all possessions means you have a dispossessive attitude towards your possessions. King Janaka was a man of renunciation. He was a king. He had all the possessions, but was totally detached mentally. That is the meaning here. Relinquished all possessions, doing mere bodily action. Again, you will be doing what you ought to do, but the difference is you do not incur sin, you do not get agitated. Next verse.
यदृच्छालाभसन्तुष्टः द्वन्द्वातीतो विमत्सरः समसिद्धावसिद्धौ च कृत्वापि न निबध्यते यदृच्छालाभसन्तुष्टः द्वन्द्वातीतो विमत्सरः समसिद्धावसिद्धौ च कृत्वापि न निबध्यते.
Content with whatever is got unsought, rising above the pairs of opposites, free from envy, equanimous in success and failure, though acting is not bound. See, do you see a repetition? He's saying he is a doer of actions. He is performing his actions. Every verse he's emphasizing on doing what you ought to do. And yet, people feel if you take up the Bhagavad Gita, you will give up everything. You will run away from your family, run away from your obligations. Some people use this for escapism. But it's like calling a dog mad and killing it. That is not the purpose. This knowledge was given to Arjuna, commander-in-chief of the Pandava forces, on a battlefield. Now, how can we ever think this is getting away from action? All that the Gita is saying is perform right action, perfect action, because that is what you're meant to do as a human. That is what you can do as a human. No other animal has a choice. A carnivore is born ferocious. It is a meat-eating animal. It is born so, it will live so, it will die so. It has no choice. A herbivore is meek and mild. It lives on vegetation. It is born so, it will live so, it will die so. But a human, you have a wide range of choices to make. Now your life will depend on the choices that you make. If you choose to act in a way that will give you peace and happiness, your mission in life is fulfilled. If you act because you have the freedom to act and choose what you want to do, by all means do so, because nobody can stop you. You must understand one thing. While everyone in the world, every human, has 100% freedom to do whatever he wants, nobody can stop you. In the ultimate sense, nobody can stop you. You have the freedom. So you choose to act in a particular way, but you must realize that when it comes to consequence of your own action, you have no choice. Why? Because you have already performed the action. Now what you will face is the consequence. Usually people start reacting when they face the consequence. They look up to the heavens and say, "Oh God, why have you done this to me? What have I done?" What is God? He doesn't know. He's yawning up there. He doesn't know what you're talking. You go to all the temples, you go to all the pilgrimages, want to reverse your action. Fait accompli. You've already finished that action. Now what you have to do is face the consequence. You have no choice. So if you are a sensible person, you know you have to face the consequence of your own action. You better understand that and do whatever you ought to do in the right way. So here he says, in perfection in action is when you're content with whatever is got, unsought. You don't run after it, but you do whatever you ought to do, and the results come to you. You rise above dvandvas, meaning at the physical level, you are not affected by the opposites, heat and cold. Vimatsaraha, you rise above mental agitations, envy, free from envy. Equanimous in success and failure, an intellectual attitude towards whatever is the outcome of actions. Such a person, though acting, is not bound.
Gata sangasya muktasya jnanavasthita chetasaha yajñāyācharatah karma samagram praviliyate. Gata sangasya muktasya jnanavasthita chetasaha yajñāyācharatah karma samagram praviliyate.
One who is devoid of attachment, liberated, with mind established in knowledge, acting for yajna, sacrifice, his whole action is dissolved. So how can your actions be dissolved? When he uses the word action, you must understand action means desire, means vasana. That is the chronology. From vasana comes your thought, desire, action. This is the chronology of action. So he says here, your action is dissolved, means your desires are dissolved, means your vasanas are dissolved. How? When one is devoid of attachment. You do things because you like to do, you avoid things because you don't like it. That is not the way to function. You will function in this world according to your duties and obligations. If that you do, you are devoid of attachment, liberated. Because you have acted in the right way, you will be liberated from actions and with mind established. How will you be able to do this? Because your mind is established in wisdom, which is relative. And when your mind is established in the highest absolute sense, you have reached the self. You are established in the self. Though acting, how do you act? As yajna, as sacrifice. Acting for yajna and sacrifice, which is going to be the theme from now on. So he's given us all the reasons how one should act. He's explained right action so far and concluded his whole action will be dissolved. If you do actions in the way that has been recommended, you will be active and successful in this world. And what's more, whatever desires and vasanas you have will be dissolved. And that is the path to the ultimate truth. And having said that, he concludes this part of the chapter. We're talking about the topic where he explains how actions of the enlightened do not bind. With the famous verse, the 24th verse is an oft-quoted famous verse we will just study.
Brahmarpanam Brahmahavihi Brahmagnau Brahmanahutam Brahmaiva tena gantavyam Brahma karma samadhina Brahmarpanam Brahmahavihi Brahmagnau Brahmanahutam Brahmaiva tena gantavyam Brahma karma samadhina.
The act of offering is Brahman, the oblation is Brahman, offered by Brahman in the fire of Brahman. By seeing Brahman in action, Brahman verily shall be reached by him. I did tell you this is an oft-quoted verse. In fact, it's usually chanted before partaking of meals. Every time you take a meal, you pray. This is a prayer before meals. Now the idea is you don't forget Brahman, that reality, in and through your activities in the world. And that is that spirit of yajna, which he says, he just mentions the word yajna, which is translated as sacrifice. But you know the ritual. There's a ritual, which is the yajna. You have a brick wall trough that is constructed and there is fire that is invoked. This is what we perform, a yajna. Now you must understand, Krishna is talking to Arjuna on the battlefield. So when he is recommending Arjuna should perform yajna, surely he doesn't mean the ritual, sit in the battlefield and start a havan there. That's not the meaning. So there is a new meaning infused into this word yajna, which will take us all along our lives. A practical way by which we can all live a life of true value, of high principles. And that is the yajna principle, where you make an offering. So how it goes is, when you make an offering, the fire shoots up. So in the yajna and the ritual, there are a lot of participants. And each one brings something from their own home. Usually it was grain, those days. So everybody brought grain from home and kept it in one part of the yajna-shala. Now you are not asked, how much did you bring? Did you bring a sack full or a cart full or a bag full or a handful? Nothing is asked. But everyone brought in whatever they could afford and keep it. And when the yajna started, each participant took a handful and offered. And at the end of the yajna, the ashes when all the fire died down, the ashes were placed on the forehead in 3 stripes. And finally, each one went to the temple, entered the temple after the yajna. So again, this is symbolic. So when you perform your activities, the brick wall trough is the field of activity that you are engaged in. So it could be your home, it could be your business, your profession, whatever you're doing. And in that, you can't be the sole achiever in anything that you have done. There are always others who contribute, big or small. You don't check all that. But you understand, each one is important in that project. So what do? You have an attitude of giving in whatever you do. And with that attitude of giving, not getting, what can I get? If I give this, what will I get? That is not the attitude. Let me do this to the best of my ability. Offer this service for the welfare of that unit, that attitude you have, and each one does that, the fires shoot up. Meaning the organization, the project will prosper. And when this happens, the benefits are distributed to one and all. The prasad is distributed to one and all. In a spiritual sense, whatever activities you perform with the best of your ability, it will be blessed because the fires shoot up. It will be successful. And even so, at the end of the ceremony, you take the ashes, which is distributed to one and all, and put it on your forehead, meaning you cross the 3 types of desires at the physical, emotional, and intellectual levels. You're not guided by desires anymore. You've crossed them. You've got rid of them, as a result of which you enter the temple, you reach your destination, you become the self. So why we chant this is, in any activity, instead of getting involved in the pleasure, particularly meals, you understand whatever I do, I'm doing it for the best, with my best ability, but this is a means to an end. This is not an end. That attitude of objectivity will bring success and peace. And what is more is, it leads you to the ultimate perfection. Please think about this. We'll take it afresh tomorrow and we continue there. Thank you very much.